to all our Hala Hala followers. Today we're going to be interviewing someone who is used to be on the other side of the table, most famous for his many wonderful interviews and blog posts as a creator of the commentary website and YouTube channel, The Comics Cube, Mr. Duy Tano. Hi, Duy.
How are you guys?
We're
This is very new for me. I'm not used to this.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, perfect. So, Duy, you're a Filipino content creator with your very own platform, the Comics Cube.
Yes.
That you created about 15 years ago. So keeping that up for so many years is a great achievement. And on your platform, you talk about every information there is to know about comics, right? So whether it's the comics themselves or the artists or the creators, right? That's the content that you produced. And we just want to know, to start off, what sparked your love for comics?
I have an older brother. I feel like a lot of people have their origin stories this way. So I have an older brother, and therefore comics was always in my life. The interesting thing is my older brother was an artist, right? So he was always telling me about who was drawing what book and whatnot. So I was always, from a very early age, very aware that these things were made by people. Like, I never had that whole experience of being like, you know how it is, like when you're a fan of something and like you believe that like Superman is real or that Star Wars is real or whatever it is. Like, I never had that experience because I was always like, all right, so this is Superman by George Perez, this is Superman by John Byrne. So which is why I think I gravitated towards really being into the process of making comics and wanted to get behind the scenes, and why I eventually ended up, talking to writers and the artists. So if you notice my conversations with writers and artists, a lot of the time my questions aren't like why would this character do that? It's a lot of it is like, what leads to you making sure that this character reacts this way or whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So your older brother had a big influence on your exploration, right, of comics. So,
Yeah.
So can you tell us more about him and your relationship with him?
He's the best. He's 5 years older. He's 5 years older than me, and I wasn't the biggest kid in school or whatever. Made sure that I knew how to stand up for myself and all of that. But when it comes to comics and music, he introduced me to like a lot of things. And then, when you're 5 years younger than your older sibling, you kind of look up to them, you kind of emulate them for a long time. And then eventually, you develop your own tastes and stuff. So there is a lot of him in the stuff that I like. Like Superman, for example, just one of my favorite characters ever. And I think a lot of it is because he's one of his favorite characters ever. But there's also like, a lot of things from different aspects of the life I've lived that evolved into that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
Since you said you've always been kind of more interested in the behind the scenes of the comics, what do you think was your origin story, or how did you first get into interviewing?
Oh, interviewing. That's a good question. So I lived in the States for 5 years. So I came back to the Philippines around 2006. And around that time, there was starting to be, well, maybe not starting to be, I wouldn't really know because I wasn't here, right? But I was getting really curious about local comics. And so this was maybe around 2008, I think. And then I went into a bookstore where, to Fully Booked is the name of the bookstore, because everything in the Philippines is a pun. And a guy was giving a talk on Filipino comics and how a lot of comics were, a lot of stories in general are stories that you can tell anywhere else, but like with a local flavor. And that guy was Budget Tan, who was the writer of Trece. And it's the first time we ever met. and I was the annoying kid in the back, like asking him a bunch of questions. And then we started talking to each other. And then when I had my website, the Comics Cube, and I decided I was gonna try to interview people. He was the first guy that I messaged. I said, "Hey, Budge, would you like to come give me an interview?" And he graciously said yes. Many, many years later, when I launched a YouTube channel, I said, "Hey, Budge, would you like to be my first guest on the Comics Cube on YouTube?" And he very graciously said yes. Because I was able to get budget, I think I was able to get a lot of other local artists and writers. When it came to more Western creators, so for the channel, one of my first ever interviews was an artist named Gene Ha, who drew one of my favorite comics of all time. It's called Top 10. And basically, because Gene appeared on my channel, I was able to say people, "Hey, Gene has appeared on my channel. Would you like to come on my channel?" And then, and then pretty soon it was this writer, this artist, and basically then I had a laundry list of people that I could say, like, "This person has shown up. Would you like to also show up?" Including one very recently canceled writer. So we won't name him. I'll tell you guys off camera.
Yeah. So that the Comics Cube sparked really quickly because of your connection, and that's amazing. But I'm sure it couldn't have all been easy, right? So when you first started off, what were the initial challenges that you faced?
So when I had the website, this is interesting, is when I had the website, there were not really any challenges. I was just kind of like talking about the stuff that I liked about comics. The real challenge was this, and I think that everybody can really learn from this, because if you go to the website right now, comicscube.com, you won't really see many of the old things, because when you're a young person, you say a lot of things that when you're a little older, you're like, maybe I don't believe that anymore. And I don't really think I said anything incendiary, but it was more just like, it was more just, maybe I should have calmed down a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, why was I mad at this thing? This is really stupid. Like, so one of the challenges was making sure, for example, if I was going to reach out to somebody, for an interview, I actually checked. I'm like, did I ever say anything bad about this person or their work? And fortunately, 95% of the time, the answer was no. So if I did like their work, I liked their work, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other challenge was, so here's the thing. I launched the channel, youtube.com/thecomicscube, in July 2020. And the reason for that is because I lived alone at the height of the pandemic, and I was just looking for a reason to talk to human beings. And that's basically how that started. The whole thing was an accident. I didn't really expect to have that many guests or that many people interested in coming on the show. What I really underestimated was that a lot of people lived alone and were also looking for human interaction. And I really appreciated them taking the time to come on. The challenge was I wasn't really prepared for the technical aspects of podcasting. I definitely wasn't prepared to do all the editing, and the graphics and stuff, because everybody always says like, "Oh, make some TikTok length videos and whatnot." But the problem that I have when talking to artists and writers is that legitimately, virtually the whole conversation is interesting to me, and I don't know what to cut. I legit do not know what to cut. And so I just end up putting the whole thing up. And I basically tell people, look, this whole thing was interesting to me. I'm sure parts of it will be interesting to you guys. So that is, for me, the main challenge when it started.
Since you think that there's so many that a lot of your interviews are uncuttable. What do you think are some of your favorite or like the most notable interviews you've had in the past few years since 2020?
I don't think they're uncuttable. I just think they're uncuttable to me.
Oh yeah.
like, um, so again, I had a famous writer, Mark Wade, on the show yesterday. I was editing his interview before you came out, and before I logged in here, and it was announced that he was going to be working on a whole new title, which is The Adventures of Superman when he was a young man, when he was Superboy. And instead of asking him about Superboy and stuff, I was like, "So you're artist? How is like what's it like working with him? That kind of thing." So um, I think that the public wants different information from what I want, which is why I think it's very difficult for me to do the cutting. But if you're talking about memorable interviews, I've had Budget on virtually any time he's had a book launch. The most viewed interview that I've had, the most viewed full interview that I've had, is the interview with Budget right after the launch of the trailer for Tresse, the cartoon on Netflix. That was fun because it was not something that the thing is, he didn't write the cartoon, right? So he didn't write the cartoon. That was a whole other team. So it was different from the kinds of conversations that we were used to. So over there is a drawing of a character named Promethea by one of my favorite artists named J.H. Williams III. He has a comic book called Echolands. So every single time Echolands comes out with a new issue, JH and I do a whole page-by-page recap of how he designed the pages, what goes on in the story, etc. The interview that got me the most viewers by far is an interview with a very, very talented artist named Bill Sienkiewicz, who was most famous in the 80s, I think, for his work on the New Mutants and Daredevil, but is now he just kind of paints and just does whatever he wants. And when I released that interview, I think I got 1,000 followers in a day. And a lot of people watch. The thing is, a lot of people watch without following, right? So I ended up getting a bunch. So that, and then I have a recurring guest named Jeffrey Thorne, who he's a writer who is just so much fun to interview. I could interview him about his grocery shopping, and he would find a way to make it fun. So those are the ones that come to mind, are the repeating guests. And those are the ones that I think have repeated the most. And Mark Wade, who I mentioned earlier, has also repeated a number of times. So he was a childhood hero of mine. So it was really cool. The coolest interviews I've ever done were, I have a favorite artist. His name is George Perez. And he passed away in May of 2022. And right before he passed away, I managed to talk to a lot of the people that I've interviewed to give maybe a 5 to 10 minute testimony about him and stuff. So many people said so many things that video was 5 hours long. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and right now you've had many interviews, and since the start of this one, you've been naming a bunch of famous names, right? But if you had the chance to do an interview with anyone, what would be your dream interview?
My dream interview is with my favorite writer of all time, Alan Moore, because I have spoken to, I think, 10 of his collaborators and his daughter. I have had them all on the show. And it's just it's kind of like being so close to something without being able to get there. And there's a lot of things about, he's written so many of the things that I've loved. which is not to say I've loved everything he's written, but he's written so many of the things that have changed my life. So that would be my number one desire for an interview of anyone who's still alive,
Yeah.
right? Of anyone who's still alive.
And
So that would be, yeah.
yeah, and what would you ask Alan if you had the chance?
Well, the thing is, he doesn't want to talk about comics anymore. So maybe that's kind of why he won't. That's kind of the reason that's been given. But there's a lot of other things like about that we could probably talk about because he's just into a lot of stuff. Like he's into magic, and like I think that's interesting. I'm not saying that it's something that I subscribe to, but I do think it's interesting. And he's writing novels now and whatnot. So I do think stuff like that would be fun to talk about. For Filipino comics, there are so many that I would like to talk to. The reason that I haven't done a lot until the past year is because I was working in a company that worked with a lot of media clients. So it was discouraged to. It was basically kind of seen as a conflict of interest to be promoting, local work. Trece was an exception because Trece was produced for an international audience, right? But that is something that I am working towards, and hopefully I get to spotlight more Filipino artists very soon.
Speaking of Filipino artists, and since your origin story somewhat involved a lot of Filipino artists and Filipino interviewees, what do you think separates Filipino creatives apart in the global creative industry? Since you're trying to push more into that focus.
What do I think sets them apart? This is, like 5 or 6 years ago, this would have been so easy to answer because I think that Filipino creatives really, really liked to play on Filipino mythology, Filipino mysticism, all Filipino folklore, of which I wholeheartedly support because there's so much of it. And when you even talk to Filipinos, a lot of them are more familiar with like Greek mythology or Norse mythology and stuff. So I do think that is cool for us to be focusing on that. And I think that 5 years ago, that would have been my answer. These days, there is such a variety of Filipino artists and writers and creatives that it is difficult to answer that, except for the fact that I do think the biggest difference between Filipino artists and everyone else is that there seems to be an equal influence from American comics and from Japanese media. So although having said that, manga is having a big effect on American comics in lately, in the last 20 or so years. But if you look at a Filipino comic, you will see traces of Filipino illustration, which is very fine illustration, because if you look at the wave of 70s comic book artists that came from the Philippines, they're all really fine artists. And then if you take a look at, and then you'll also see the American influence, the dynamism, the speed, the power and stuff. And then also like just the way that a lot of Filipino artists will contort things and it kind of looks a bit manga-ish, anime-ish. So it kind of looks like a hybrid of all three of those things a lot of the time, which is not to say that everybody does that because everybody has a different style, obviously. So that would be my answer. It's just like there's a bit more of an equal influence from its history and from American and Japanese media. Which is funny because those were two of our colonizers.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so as you just said, there is a big influence of the American and Japanese medias right now, and you would like to put an emphasis on the Filipino culture, right?
Yeah.
So what aspect of the Filipino culture do you wish more creatives would write or discuss about?
Yeah, okay. So I do think I'm not opposed to more mythology-based stuff. The reason that there is so much mythology based stuff, and I do like mythology based stuff. The reason that I like mythology based stuff in the Philippines is because since the Philippines was before the colonization of Spain, before the Spain colonized the Philippines, not really a country so much as a collection of city states. So all of these different islands kind of had their different mythologies that kind of just overlap and everything. It's not just like one pantheon. So there's like a lot of things that we could play off of. So that's one thing. The other thing is I would really actually be game for a lot of comics that played on Filipino history, right? Like, just put up some historical fiction in there, or maybe some biographies and something, because that goes to another thing that I actually believe in. Is if I had comics as textbooks in school, I would have learned so much more. And so I think that if we were to show some of the history of the Philippines, because like, how many people know the American Revolutionary War? Like, so many people, right? Like, and how many people know about like what was happening in Europe during World War II? Like, so many people. But how many people know about what was going on in the Pacific, in the Philippines during World War II? Right? It's not the same number. And I always think it's kind of funny because if you talk about like the history of World War II, like, just do the bullet points. Hitler invaded Poland, and then the whole war in Europe, and then somehow it ends because America drops a bomb on Japan. Right? So it doesn't really make sense if you're just looking at it from that point of view, because I do think that we need to put a little bit more of a spotlight on stuff that's been going on here, and I think that I would really like to see a little bit more of that kind of thing, of like more historical stuff, maybe more world event stuff in the Philippines.
Yeah, I really think it's interesting that we should put more of the Filipino culture outside and to really relate, especially because I think the holiday for the martial law is coming up. So I think that's something that's really interesting for Filipino culture. We just recently celebrated it in school. And I think, speaking of Filipino creatives, is there anything that you're looking forward to of a collaboration between Filipino creatives, or you dream of happening in the future?
Yeah, I love the landscape right now for Filipino creatives is so diverse, and what I love about it is that there's so many people who are both a writer and an artist. So I would kind of really like to see them continue making their own thing. But in terms of collaborations, there's so many that I would like to see kind of pair up. Like when Kat Olan and Ian Santamaria teamed up to do Machina, I was like, I never thought about these two people working together. But then I thought, the moment it was announced, I was like, oh, a writer who loves mechas and an artist who loves mechas. Duh, right? I'll name a couple of my friends because I do think that they would do a really good job working together. Duy Tano, the writer of Third World Power, and John Amore, the artist of Urban Animal, because JV is a very good friend of mine, and I know like a lot of the stories and ideas that he would like to put out there into the world. And for many reasons, I do think John would be a great artist to work with him. John is, I think, one of the best artists the Philippines has. And I think John Amore is the right person to bring JV's stories to life if they're willing to. So you listen to me, John. Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. And we just want to mention that you're going to be moving your content to another platform that is going to be called Patreon, right? So it's going to be patreon.com/thecomicscube. And what can we expect to find? So what can we look forward to on your side?
It's interesting because what happened was the website itself kind of made it so that, how do I put this? It's hard to get people to go to the website because because with the way social media has evolved, people don't really leave their little social media platforms anymore. So what ended up happening was that I just ended up writing a bunch of stuff on Facebook that ended up being content that was not by design. So what I decided to do was kind of to move that stuff over to Patreon, where it's cheap. It's only like $3 a month to subscribe to my ramblings, but it's also where I will be putting up works in progress, because in addition to interviews and stuff, I will also be starting to trying to do things like video essays, like those long form video essays. But again, editing is a challenge for me. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting them up on Patreon as they go. And then once I have a completed product, I will put it up on YouTube. Now, for interviews and stuff, I'm thinking of also making Patreon the early access. So like putting up a little short preview of every episode before it goes up on Patreon, just to kind of make it worth the subscription fee. Again, it's $3 a month, guys. Come on. But the other thing is also just I kind of want to move away from Facebook for the most part, for a variety of reasons. But because the Philippines is such a Facebook heavy country, like there are so many people who have the internet and access only Facebook and TikTok. For Filipino related stuff, I can't really move away from Facebook, but I think for the more global comics related stuff, I'll be moving more to Patreon and to Blue Sky, and obviously to YouTube.
Yeah, that's amazing. So a lot of new projects to expect from you. And one more time,
Hopefully.
that's going to be on patreon.com/thecomicscube.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm also on Blue Sky and obviously on YouTube.
Perfect. Good. So we were very happy to have you with us today, Duy. Great interview to learn about all the influences that you had in your life and the plans and your origin story from where it all started to the point of the big impact that you've had on your community.
I hope so. Like, I was, I didn't really mean for it to have a big impact or anything. I really just was looking for a way to stay sane during the pandemic. But I have been told that the impact has been, not small. So I'm very, very grateful. And thank you guys. And support Filipino comics, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Duy. We're very glad to have you with us today.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.